Hey love, what's up? Welcome to Confidently Uncomfortable. I'm your host Jago, health and lifestyle coach and not so regal confidence queen. Coming at you with the real, the raw, and of course, the uncomfortable. My mission is to show you that to be confident, it has absolutely nothing to do with being perfect or having it all together, and everything to do with you getting uncomfortable and pushing your limits. Thanks for joining me. Let's dive in. We are figuratively going to be breaking down walls in today's episode. I titled this Breaking Walls or Breaking Down Walls. I don't know. I haven't written the title yet, but that's the plan I'm doing. And I'm doing that because I think it's really important to identify what are some walls that you've set up for yourself and versus what are boundaries you set for yourself. I'm going to talk today in today's episode about what's the difference between walls versus boundaries. Why does it even matter? If I am setting up walls in my life, how do I break them down? And then if I'm still struggling to set boundaries, how do I build boundaries? Can I do both simultaneously? And so we're going to take it to where we're focusing in with ourselves, within ourselves, and what we can do, as well as focusing out and connecting to others. So this is going to be a great episode. So I'm really excited you've chosen to join us today. Now, I have spoken a lot about the importance of setting boundaries in your life, especially if you are a people pleaser and you're always putting yourself on the back burner. And I actually made another podcast episode, episode 7, called Let's Talk Boundaries. And that was a really good episode, but I honestly think this one is even a better one to at least start with before you dive into setting boundaries, because I don't want you to get it twisted. I don't want you to get it confused with the difference between the two, because you might be setting up walls in your life that you think are just healthy boundaries when actually it's actually more of an unhealthy thing for you in the end. And if you're new to setting boundaries and what that even means, I'll give you a condensed version of this. I want you to listen to this episode and then you can go back and listen to episode 7 to really dig deeper into what those boundaries can be for you. So with boundaries, those are things that you're using to help you define what's important to you and protect you from being trampled all over by other people or by yourself. And it's really a good way to safeguard your time, your energy, and emotions to keep them from being controlled and manipulated or abused by others. Because it can be really easy, if we don't set boundaries, for other people to walk over us and for other people to take our time and energy without us even allowing it. It almost seems like if we don't set this line and the standard for ourselves, it's not going to be beneficial for us. So with boundaries, contrary to what some people would see boundaries as a bad thing, I always felt like that was a bad thing. But they're not selfish, they're not insensitive, and they're not unloving. They're actually really, really good to help you with having a healthy and loving relationship with yourself as well as with others. So boundaries are just as important for you as they are with your other relationships outside of yourself. So with setting boundaries, there are ways to identify them. There are ways to figure it out. So I'm going to kind of give you a little boundary quiz to see if this is something that you need to maybe work on. So if you're listening to this and you're not in your car, then I want you to kind of put a little tick mark down or a check mark down for if any of these pertain to you. So first question, do you feel responsible for others' happiness? Do you feel responsible for others' happiness? Number 2, do you feel responsible to fix other people's problems? Next question, number 3, do you feel guilty over even the smallest thing? So any small thing that you try and do for yourself, do you immediately feel guilty about it? Number 4, do you struggle to say no when people ask you things? That was me, P.S. Number 5, do you avoid sharing your opinion to avoid confrontation? AKA, do you hate confrontation? And number 6, do you find it difficult to express your needs to others? So what you want, what your desires are, do you find it difficult to express? So if you checked off mentally or physically 3 or more of those, then yes, I definitely setting boundaries is something you need to focus on or maybe refocus on, because I know sometimes when life happens or just things start to hit us, it can be hard and we kind of waver on those boundaries we've set for ourselves. I know that that's something I've done so often when I'm starting to deal with other people's problems that are wearing on me. I will sometimes let these boundaries slip. But Boundaries are going to help you define what's important in our lives, and it's going to really help you not only love yourself more, but love other people more and deeper. So if that's something that you were like, oh, I definitely need that, then keep listening to this episode and then go back and listen to just how to set boundaries in episode 7. So just a quick rundown with boundaries. Again, I'm going to go into setting up walls, but I wanted to give a good background on setting boundaries first. So how to set boundaries, this is a reminder, even if you know. Definitely number 1, like be direct, specific, and honest. Like figure out what do you need and what do you need to limit and avoid. So there are certain things that you know that you need in life, and there are certain things that you know you need to limit or you need to completely avoid. So identifying that and then being direct about it. Number 2 is to listen to your feelings. Sometimes you feel like, hey, I'm spreading myself too thin, saying yes to this, and you need to identify that and listen to it, trust your gut. Number 3 would be to not use passive-aggressive language and to make sure you are direct and open. So a lot of times we want something from a relationship and we are passive-aggressive about it, or someone's doing something that is crossing a boundary, and instead of being direct about it, we're passive. And so instead of writing a passive-aggressive sticky note and sticking it on your roommate's kitchen counter, like address the situation and explain why that's crossing a boundary for you and why it's making you feel unseen in some way. The other thing that's important when you are setting boundaries is to share with you in mind. This is the 4th thing I wrote down. It's share with you in mind instead of pointing fingers. So this is important because a lot of times when we want to express how we're feeling, we immediately want to point at others. And really it comes back to us and what we need and how we're feeling. Because example would be saying, I need or I feel this way instead of statements that point blame. Next thing, number 5, is to be clear and concise. I said being direct, but being clear and concise is important too. So don't back down and identify what needs to change. So if you know that you need a clear boundary and someone is not respecting that, you need to be clear. You also don't need to explain or justify your boundaries. So no is a complete sentence. You can say no and not feel bad or guilty about it. However, typically when you're first starting to set boundaries, that is like, oh, that's so scary. I want to like justify it and make sure they know that they're not mad. And yeah, so you can, if you want to, explain your why behind needing that boundary set, but just remind yourself that you don't owe anyone that explanation. Next thing, number 6, is to start small. So if you are someone that checked off and you struggle to say no to people, start with setting boundaries with something small. So if you're struggling to say no to your boss and that is like super intimidating to change that, start by just setting small boundaries in other areas of your life first, just like very small, simple things. Number 7 is to stick to it. This is a hard one. When setting a boundary, there's going to be pushback. It's normal, but follow through is key. So even if someone that you've already set a boundary for is not listening to it, is still going over the line with something that you've set just for your personal health, the last thing that goes to this is remind and release. So number 8 is remind and release. So when someone crosses that line, like what I was saying with the boundaries, remind them and then release the attachment to their reaction. So you're going to remind and release. This is a big one for me because I do have to reiterate boundaries sometimes and I feel bad about it and I don't want to. So in order to do that, I remind and then release my attachment to their reaction. So even if they feel how it's really, we can't control how they feel or react to you setting a boundary. So you can't allow that guilt to take over. Otherwise, you're going to always backslide away from those boundaries you've set for yourself. So think about like, what do you struggle with most when it comes to boundaries? And so I'll give you, with me, like I really struggled with saying no if people were asking for help, or if I always struggled with if someone came to me with their problems, I was immediately like all in, like I'm going to listen to every single thing. I'm going to help them. I'm going to support them. But then I was letting go anything that I needed. I wasn't giving myself the adequate space and energy to receive the information without letting it personally affect me, because I'm very empathetic and I feel other people's pain and stress and anything they're going through. And so if I'm not setting myself up for success before going into that situation, my own mental health is going to suffer. I don't know if anyone else is like this, but that's how I am. So that is why I preach setting up boundaries, because it's so important. So now I want to kind of shift into setting up walls. So let's talk about that a little more. Like, what I mean by that is when we're setting up walls, it's almost to it's to enclose you. So you're setting up a wall in more of a sense of a barrier as instead of like a boundary or a standard for yourself. So when you're setting up a wall, you're essentially enclosing yourself into solitary confinement. And that is not the end goal with loving yourself and showing up fully for yourself and being your best self. If you were completely, I'm sitting in a closet right now, so it feels like I'm in solitary confinement. But imagine I'm in this room, this tiny room, and I've put myself there because I've set up these walls to avoid having real connection with people because of maybe past fear or stories I've told myself. I've set up walls because I'm scared of things I can't control, which is other people's emotions and reactions and opinions of me. I'm setting up walls because I don't want to have to deal with negative energy. And I think that in the like mindset spiritual world, I think a lot of people are getting it wrong, especially in the current climate with like everything going on in the world right now with Black Lives Matter and with even like the like COVID. Like there's a lot going on in the world and it affects you as well as everyone else. And so to just say like, oh, well, I only want to focus on positivity when the world is on fire, that is not the solution. That is avoidance. All right. That wall you're putting up is avoidance. And so that's when a wall is something that is unhealthy. It's toxic. It's actually taking away life from you, opposed to it's like blocking out light, opposed to a boundary, which is helping you conserve that energy and feel lifted from that. So opposed to a wall, which is like a barrier, which is covering light and avoidance. Okay. So I'm trying to explain the both of them, and I hope that that's helping you make sense, like the mental side of it. If you were to do it, think of it as like a boundary is like a line in the sand that you've set up about yourself, and like you can still see what's going on around you, but you're just aware of like when you need to step out of like that zone and when you need to like allow someone to come up to you but not cross that line, and like connect with you but not make it to where it's negatively impacting you long-term mental health in a toxic way. Whereas with a wall, it's like you're completely avoiding that connection with others. And I think that it's really easy to do. I'll give some personal examples here. Whew, I'm not excited to do this, but I'm going to because I know it's important to be vulnerable and get uncomfortable. So I'll give you some personal experience with setting up walls, and I'll also give some experience, not specific examples. I'm not going to call names, but just with clients I've worked with that have been really open and honest with me about some walls that they've set for themselves. So in my own life, going on this like self-discovery journey where I'm like falling on myself and like setting boundaries and recognizing the importance of that. Like I got so into setting boundaries that I wanted to avoid anything that could knock me off, anything. And there's a time and a place for that. Like sometimes you are in a space where you truly need to just focus on your mental health. That's all you like. That is the number one goal, is like you need to just focus on that. And there's nothing to feel guilty or bad about that. Even if there is a lot going on bad in the world, you don't need to feel guilty about that. However, if it is constant avoidance and you've worked through a lot of your own shit and you're still refusing to connect with other people, you're still refusing to pour your light into other people who are still hurting, who are still suffering, like that's a wall that is going to cut off any sort of growth you can have personally and any sort of growth we can have in this world. And I talked about growth actually earlier today with some of my clients, and it's like we need to be able to sit in tension in order to create growth. I think the quote that I talked about today was, your tolerance for tension determines your potential for growth. And I think I might do a podcast episode on this, but I'll say it again. It's Stephen Furtick said this: your tolerance for tension determines your potential for growth. And when it comes to walls versus boundaries, a lot of times the walls we're setting is because we're like, ooh, like that was hard. That didn't feel good. I'm going to set a wall and tell myself that I shouldn't do that. And I'm going to let me bring it back to fitness, and then I can bring it back to my client. But fitness thing can be, so we think about things that maybe make us uncomfortable. So let's say that we're like lifting heavy weights or being in like the like muscle macho area of the gym makes you feel uncomfortable. And you're like, ugh, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't feel good when I lift weights, and I feel really like people are just staring at me. And then we tell ourselves like, oh, well, I'm just not going to do that. Like, I'm going to make that a rule for myself where I don't go to that area of the gym because I never feel good, and I'm just not going to do it. So you've set that like wall for yourself where like, okay, I won't step out of my comfort zone here. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And so in your mind, you're like, no, it was a boundary, but really it's a wall you've set for yourself, because that's something where you're holding yourself back from some amazing growth, not only with your fitness, but with your confidence in yourself, because there's that tension, that uncomfortable situation of being in a gym where maybe you feel like you're being judged when really in actuality, a lot of times, like, everyone's so self-obsessed, they're not looking at you. But by setting that rule for yourself, like, I'm not going to do that, that's a wall that's holding you back. So that's an example with fitness. Another one with just our health, and this is one that my client told me, and it really hit me. So we were talking about weight loss, and she had gained a significant amount of weight, and she was actually starting to lose weight with me as my client. And we were having a coaching session, and she broke down, and I asked her, I said, like, well, what's wrong? Like, what are you feeling right now? And she said, I'm afraid to lose more weight because my weight has always been a barrier, a wall from me in the world. Y'all, that hit me. I'd honestly never thought about holding on to weight in that sense. I did talk to you guys about like the mental weight that we hold on to a lot of times, that's like guilt and shame and about our body, about our lives, whatever. But to bring that step to like, that's something that also can hold us back from losing weight, even if it's for our health, even if it's going to help us lower like our health risk, because we have certain risk in our family or we're towards that end of the spectrum, like still having that fear of actually losing the weight, because you're going to be more exposed to the world. The world's going to see you. And the fear behind that is like, well, what are they going to see? Like, how is that judgment is going to affect me? What if people don't like what they see? And it's like hiding behind that is something I had never thought about, but I talked more with my client about it. And it's so true. Like, we set up these walls for ourselves, and the wall is like when we do things that are almost like kicking ourselves in the foot, or whatever that phrase is. I don't know, kicking ourselves in the mouth. You know what I'm saying? Sorry, little humor break there. But basically doing things that are getting in the way of our own success. And that's a wall we can set for ourselves too. Like, every time we start to actually lose like 5 to 10 pounds because we've changed our diet and we're feeling really good. And then what happens, right? We self-sabotage. And that comes back to us setting this wall and saying like, oh, well, I'm scared what will happen if I do make these changes. I'm scared if I have to keep showing up for myself and then I mess up. And it's like, we want to prove to ourselves, see, I knew I was always going to mess up. And then that makes us feel comfortable because we already gave ourselves an out. So giving ourselves an out or an excuse for not reaching our goals is a great wall example. So I use this with our language. So I've talked about this before, saying like, I want to make these changes, or I'm trying to eat healthier, or I wish I could do this. And like, that kind of language is actually like a wall we're setting up for ourselves, saying like, okay, well, I'm going to avoid really going all in and putting myself out there and being vulnerable. So by saying like, I'm trying to do something, then if I don't actually reach that goal that I have, it's okay because I didn't go all the way in. But the truth is, I would rather you be vulnerable and open yourself up to even failing at it, but at least really going all in, and not just dipping your toe, but going all in with taking care of yourself and putting yourself first and your health first. And instead of setting up a wall to where you're still avoiding the fear of failure. And I think that the wall versus the boundary is like, walls are something we're setting up out of fear a fear mindset, and that goes politically too. Walls are set up out of fear mindset, whereas a boundary is something that is set up out of a love mindset, a love for ourselves, a love for our connection with others. And I think that's something we need to remind ourselves when, like, coming back to like, okay, well, how do I know the difference between a wall versus a boundary? Come back to it and think, okay, is this something I'm setting up for myself out of fear or out of love? Ask yourself that. Seriously. Anytime you're trying to set something up like that for yourself, you're like, okay, wait, is this a boundary or is this a wall I'm really holding myself, like capturing myself in? Is this something I'm setting out of fear or out of love? Whew. Shoot, that just came off the tongue, but it's true. And then why does it matter? Why does it matter if it's a boundary or a wall? It's still setting myself apart and like making sure that I'm staying safe. And the thing is, I'm not here for you to just create safety and create this comfort zone for you. I'm here for you to challenge yourself and break outside of that comfort zone so you can see who you truly are, see what's truly possible in your life. Like, you are so capable and so strong, but until you get vulnerable, until you put yourself out there, you're going to always wonder what if. You're going to always feel less than, and I don't want that for you. And I know that because I've been there. So when you are going into walls, like, I want you to bust through the walls. I'm cool with setting boundaries, but man, we are not here to set up walls. So how do I break down walls? That's a good question. Like you asked, I'm just assuming you did. How do I break down these walls? So if you're someone sitting here like, man, maybe I have set up some walls in my life so that I can't really connect deeply with other people or connect deeper with myself. Like, I hate sitting in a room by myself, and I hate journaling and asking myself deep questions, or I really struggle to connect deeply with people because there's just this fear. And so sometimes we do that by setting apart, like not having deep conversation, not putting ourselves in vulnerable positions, not putting ourselves like out there. And there's fear behind that. And it's like the fear of rejection, the fear of being seen and not accepted, the fear of judgment. And those fears are things that we're putting in the hypothetical. I've talked about that before, where it's things that have not yet happened, but we're just assuming. And even if people do judge us harshly for being ourselves, fuck them, right? We can't control how people are reacting and feeling about us, but we can control how we feel about ourselves. So I think setting that standard for yourself is super important to avoid putting up walls just out of fear. So breaking them down, I think identifying them, just similar to what boundaries you need. Like, I think identifying those walls maybe you've set up in your life are the first step. So identify what those have been. Maybe it's connection with people, maybe it's connection with yourself. It can be other things too, but what are some walls that you've kind of held you back from really facing and getting vulnerable and putting yourself out there? And then identify, like, okay, well, what do I need if I'm breaking down these walls and there's this fear? Identify the fear so then you can face it with love. So if your fear is this fear of rejection, then I want you to connect with yourself so you can come to self-acceptance. Because if you can come to self-acceptance, then that fear of rejection starts to dissolve, because no longer are we holding all of this weight in other people's rejection or acceptance of us. Instead, we're only holding that weight in ourselves of like, I am who I am and no one else can shake that, right? That's powerful. That's empowering. And that's how I want you to face this growth in yourself when it comes to walls. So then identifying walls. So I said fear of rejection, fear of being seen and not being accepted, I think is a really big one. And it's understandable. All of us as humankind, like, we want to be loved and accepted. We really do. I mean, God, that's all we're asking for Black lives right now, as among other marginal groups, but just for everyone to be loved and accepted. And there's this fear deep within us that's not going to happen. Or even if it is currently happening, like if you're in a current relationship, there's still a fear, whether it's with yourself or another, there's still a fear that it's going to go away. Everything is going to go away, right? And sometimes we get so caught in that fear of losing what we have that we can't even be present with what it is that we do have in our life, all the good that's there. And so that's another wall we can set for ourselves is with other people, is setting up a wall of like, well, they're going to leave me eventually. Like they're going to see me and eventually just want to leave. And the walls we set for that is telling ourselves that that's going to happen, because then when it happens, we won't be as hurt. It's like we're preparing ourselves and trying to make ourselves have thick skin. And that's a wall right there, having thick skin in that situation, when really, in order to connect with other people deeper, we gotta be vulnerable. I mean, shit's scary, but it's the only way to grow and connect with others. So being vulnerable with yourself is another amazing way to break down the wall. So I talked about self-acceptance, just looking deeper within, like asking yourself with boundaries. That's going to help you with breaking walls too, because then you're able to identify, well, what are my needs and what are my limits? So if you figure out your needs, then you can seek that within yourself, and then you can connect and find that with other people, whether it's with friends, family, significant others, like identifying those needs first, instead of assuming that you're not going to get those needs filled in other relationships. That's a wall. You need to just identify what it is and then actively seek that in yourself and in others, because it is possible. But if we're so focused on the fear of not having our needs met in relationships, then it's going to be really hard for us to be open and actually accepting when they're there. Because a lot of times they're there, but we're so focused on what's not there, or we're so focused on it leaving. And that's a real fear. And none of these things that I'm saying as far as walls, I've had them. So I don't want you to think like, oh my gosh, I have all these walls. Like I'm never going to love myself. No one's ever going to love me. Heck no. Don't lie to yourself. Don't tell yourself that lie. That is not built on truth. That is built on a lie, and it's built on the walls you've set up for yourself, and they can be broken. Okay. These walls can be broken. All right. So it is okay to break all of this down and rebuild from scratch. Sometimes that is the best way to grow, because we're being so much light is being covered up from these walls that we built. We got to knock them down. Okay. And it's scary, but it's possible. So start small, figure out what are those first things you need to do, identify those walls. And as you break them down, you can do, the next question I have is like, well, can I do both simultaneously? Can I break down these walls that I've set up, but then also set boundaries for myself? And the answer that I would say is yes. Like you can do both simultaneously. They're both going to take work. They're both going to take digging deeper into maybe some stories and narratives that we've set for ourselves over the years. Maybe like identifying what are your needs and being really deep and honest with yourself and with others on both ends, whether you're breaking down walls or setting up boundaries. Both are going to take real deep communication and connection with yourself and with others, but you can do both simultaneously. So you can break down a wall and immediately set a boundary. So an example of that would be, let's see, breaking down the wall of like, okay, well, I am not going to let people see me for who I really am. I'm not going to have I will have a lot of surface level relationships, but I don't really want to have those deep relationships because that's scary. And so that's your wall, is that you're going to have all these friends and be super social and likable. It could be something where you're using humor or sarcasm. That's a big wall. And using that, yeah, I feel that. But using that as a way of people not seeing in. And so that's the first wall we need to break down. And so we're like, okay, well, I don't want to just immediately revert to humor when someone tries to get close with me, or when someone tries to have a serious conversation with me, or when I try to have a serious conversation or confrontation with myself, identifying that that's a wall that needs to be broken down. But let's say we break that down and we don't revert to the humor when someone's trying to really dig and talk to us about something, or we're trying to do that with ourselves. Yes, we break that down and we don't immediately go to humor. But let's say that someone is pushing your limits when it comes to topics that they want to touch with you on and talk with you on that you are not ready for yet. And that's okay. Maybe they are something you need to talk about, but you're like, that is not where I'm at right now. You can set a boundary and say, hey, I'm currently not ready to get deep and talk about that yet. Here's kind of where I'm at. You're identifying and stating where you're currently at mentally, where you're currently at with a relationship or whatever. but you are still breaking down the wall of not just avoiding it altogether through humor or sarcasm. Do you see the difference? Do you see how they can both work together? So I don't want it to be that you're like, okay, I'm open and vulnerable now. Now people can ask anything of me, and now I'll do everything for everyone else, and now I'll say yes to everything because I don't want to be avoiding and setting walls. No. That's the complete opposite of what I'm trying to have you do. I want you to be able to break down the walls that are holding you back and then set the boundaries that you still need in order to thrive, okay? In order to protect your energy in a way that's still growth, that's still a meaning of growth. Whereas like avoidance and setting up those walls is not growth, okay? Think about like walls are again, blocking light, and setting boundaries are still allowing light in and light out, okay? Whew, I hope that this was really helpful for you. If you feel like there are some other people that you're like, I really want them to feel connected and seen and loved, and I want them to feel like they can break down these boundaries, send them this. This can be a good little icebreaker for them. So do that. Also, I would love for you to screenshot. I probably say this at the end of this, but I want to say it now because it means so much to me. If you just screenshot and tag me in this, or DM me on my Confidently Uncomfortable podcast Instagram, and let me know what you got out of this, or if you have any follow-up questions or any other topics you'd like me to cover. I want to know, because this doesn't end with you. Like, I want you to focus in and figure out how this can apply to yourself, and then I want you to focus out and figure out, how can I use this to connect with others? How can I use this to help others? Because in the end, that's what matters. Self-love doesn't stop here, right? It starts here. It starts with really digging deep within, and then it's an outward expression of love to other people. So that's what I wanted to do for you guys today. And I appreciate you. You are loved. And even when you feel like you are afraid of judgment, I want you to know that I see you and I hear you, and I'm here for you. You are not alone. I've been where you are when it comes to setting up walls. I've been where you are when it comes to avoidance, and you can work through this. Even if I haven't been in your shoes specifically, I want you to know that you can work through this. You are strong, you are capable, and you are going to do amazing things. Thank you for being here today, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening to Confidently Uncomfortable. I love being able to connect with you here, and honestly, don't want it to end. So head over to my Facebook group, Body Confident Blueprint, and be sure to follow me on Insta at JGoFitLife. Also, if you're ready to get real confidently uncomfortable, go leave this podcast a 5-star review and email me the review screenshot, support@jgofit360.com, for a chance to win a free 30-minute fitness audit and goal setting session. I appreciate your support. See you next time.